Feed Your Family Tonight podcast. Each week, we are serving up motivation and inspiration to help you get weeknight dinner on the table, letting you recapture a little calm in the crazy. And now, your host, speaker, author, and married mother of four, Mariefiebach.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast. I'm your host, Mariefiebach, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. Today, we're going to talk about feeding yourself. Now, this is the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast, and the focus is usually getting weeknight dinner on the table and all of the things surrounding feeding a family. But we have to remember that we are part of that family. I put something in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group asking about how people feed themselves versus feeding their family, and almost without exception, everybody talked about how they took care of their family first. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's 100% what I do in my home. But sometimes when I am focused on feeding my family, I often forget to focus on the things that I need as well. If you're listening to this in live time, it is the middle of December, and that means it's the middle of one of the busiest seasons of the year. And it's a season of the year where there's a lot of really wonderful things that are on our plates, but often it just means that there's a lot more things on our plates, and they're all good things. And while these things are good, it adds to that emotional burden of taking care of a family. In episode 75, I talked about the emotional burden of feeding your family and how there are 100 little mini decisions that we make as we are feeding our family and how that weighs on us as parents. If you have not listened to that episode, it's one of my highest rated episodes, and I encourage you to go back and listen to episode 75. But today we're going to kind of talk about feeding yourself. And the reason I'm talking about it in December is because December is when there are so many things that are happening that it's often easy to forget to stop and take care of ourselves. I know a couple of years ago, it was one of the craziest Decembers I had had in a long time, and I ended up getting really sick. And when mama's sick, there's a lot of things that slip, and it adds a little bit more stress to a season that is already extra stressful. After that experience, I said, I'm going to make sure that I try and take extra good care of myself in December. And it's about this time every year that I kind of get a little bit of a wake-up call that I need to check in and see, how am I taking care of myself? Because it's that old adage in the airplane. You have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can put the oxygen mask on your child who is sitting next to you in the airplane. Putting on my oxygen mask means that I need to make sure that I am getting enough sleep, that I am getting my daily exercise, and it also means that I have to be fueling my body with food that is good for me. And in my house, this can sometimes be a little problematic. And I suspect that I am not alone in this. I put out a thing in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group asking about how people feed themselves. And almost without exception, everyone talked about taking care of their family first, fixing their children's plates first, fixing food for their husband. And if their husband wasn't there, they probably wouldn't cook at all. We have a lot of empty nesters in our tribe and in our group. And that is not uncommon for empty nesters. I have heard that from so many empty nesters that it's hard for them to cook for just themselves. I have a couple of single people in the group that are actually really good at feeding themselves, and I take lessons from them because while I am feeding a family of 6, I am often not focusing on the food that I need to feed myself. So I'm kind of going to walk you through what it usually looks like in my house. I wonder if you can relate. But how it works in my house is I fix dinner, and I know that I need to cook an extra portion of dinner because my husband likes to take his lunches, and my twins usually take leftovers for lunch. So I'm usually making 3 extra portions of dinner, which is fine. I was talking with my friend Rebecca a few weeks ago, and she was dealing with food budgets and figuring out food in her family. And one thing that I told her that I did was I will pull my husband's lunch portion out before I start serving up dinner so that if my kids go back for seconds, they're not eating the planned leftovers that I have for him. That tip really, really helped her. So if that's something you're facing in your family, as you cook dinner and you know that you have planned leftovers, think about pulling that portion out first before you start serving up plates. Back to my dinner. I have taken out a portion for my husband. I've made a little extra so that my twins can have something for their lunch, but I don't usually pull that out before we eat. I fix up everybody's plate, including mine. Everybody eats their dinner and it's fine. But there's usually one of two things that happens. The first one is my family maybe doesn't love that dinner, and those 2 extra portions that I had planned for my twins go into the refrigerator. And I now feel the responsibility of having to eat those so that the food doesn't go to waste. Oftentimes, if my family didn't think it was the greatest dinner, it's probably not my favorite thing to be eating for dinner either. Or I have enough of the meat and the sauce, but I didn't make enough extra rice, or my kids will eat the extra rice for a snack. And so then I've got this pile of meat and sauce, and lunchtime comes and I don't really want to fix rice just for myself. Has this ever happened to you? Where you're feeling like you need to finish up the food, the odds and ends that are in the refrigerator, but they don't have all of the components that you really need to make it a good meal. And the effort of cooking those components seems like too much. That's something that I face as I'm trying to feed myself. The other thing that happens is everybody loves it. They eat it all up and there aren't any extra leftovers. And so there aren't any odds and ends in the refrigerator for me to eat. So then I'm like grabbing a random cheese stick and a handful of Cheez-Its and maybe a carrot stick if I'm really trying to be healthy. And I call that lunch. And so I'm not really taking care of myself and the lunches. Now, there are a few things that I do on occasion that really helps with this. And during this time in December, it takes a little bit of extra effort to make some of these things happen, but I know the times that I stop and focus on these, I am always so thankful. So for instance, a few weeks ago, I noticed that I was not eating good lunches for myself and I was grabbing those random cheese sticks. And so on Sunday, I made a giant breakfast casserole with homemade turkey sausage and lots of spinach in it and not very much cheese, but a little bit of cheese to make it taste good. And I baked up this giant breakfast casserole and I kept it in the refrigerator and I ate on it all week long. And it was so good to have that nourishing food just for me. My kids did not want to eat the breakfast casserole because it had spinach in it. They weren't going to touch it. My husband ate some of it. He liked some of it, but it was nice to have something in the refrigerator just for me. In the episode where I asked if your family ate soup, I talked about how oftentimes there are some soups that I will make just for myself. I've kind of run out of my freezer stash, but I like to keep a few soups in my freezer that are just for me that I can pull out for a lunch when there is nothing left over in the refrigerator that needs to get eaten and I want some food for my lunch. I love making my vegan Asian carrot soup and I keep that in the freezer. And my curried pumpkin soup, I like to keep that in the freezer as well. And usually I just freeze them in mason jars. Now, a little tip for freezing in mason jars is you want to make sure that you leave extra headroom because liquids will expand as they freeze and you need a space for that liquid to expand to. So you want to leave a good inch at the top of a mason jar. I usually use the little 1 pint mason jars and I leave a good inch of space at the top so there's room for that liquid to expand. There's a new product out there called Super Cubes and they are silicone cubes, like ice cube trays, but they're in 1 cup and 2 cup measurements. I've actually asked for some of those for Christmas because I think that that would be a great way to freeze some of these soups that I want to eat for my lunches. I will link to them in the show notes. I have not personally used them, but my friends Rachel and Polly at Thriving Home have used them and they highly recommend them. And I really trust what Rachel and Polly have to say. So I will recommend them to you on their recommendation, but I'll link to them in the show notes. But if you can think about the types of foods that you like to eat, especially when there aren't any odds and ends in your refrigerator, and make a large batch of that. A few weeks ago, my husband had said that he really was craving butternut squash. And so I bought 2 giant butternut squash and I cooked them in my Instant Pot and I pureed them in my food processor and I kept those around and we added them to some of my husband's lunches to give him a little bit of extra vegetables. I mixed them with like some heavy cream and a few spices to make a butternut squash soup for my lunch. And it really didn't take too much effort to get my Instant Pot out and cook up a little bit of butternut squash for me. As we are in this busy season, I want you to think about some of the things that you can do to get food ready for yourself so that you are taking time to eat well during this busy season. Even though you are taking care of your family, I know that if you're anything like me, you're putting yourself last. And sometimes that means that everybody else has eaten and there aren't enough leftovers left for you. And so I want you to think about what kind of foods can you buy? What kind of foods can you make in bulk ahead so that you can have food to feed yourself? I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of empty nesters in this group. And when I have an empty nester write to me in my email, which you can email me anytime, I'm Marie at Mariefiebach.com, and I love answering your questions and connecting with you. But they'll write to me in the email saying, it's just the 2 of us. I was used to cooking for a large family, and now it's kind of hard to go through the effort of cooking just for 2 people. And the advice that I usually give, which is something that I have seen my parents do as they have moved into the phase of empty nest, and I try and do this a little bit for myself, is to cook a large batch of proteins at the beginning of the week and repurpose that protein throughout the week. So an example of that would be to cook a grill full of chicken breasts, and you can have chicken breasts the first night just grilled. And then the second night you can put it into a creamy grilled chicken pasta. And the next night you can make a grilled chicken quesadilla. And the night after that you can have chicken on a salad and have a chicken Caesar salad. You can do this as an empty nester, or you can do this for yourself. I have gotten in the habit of keeping turkey meatballs in the freezer almost all the time for my children. Sometimes my kids will come home and they will want a snack and they want something that is meaty. Sometimes my kids will say, I want a snack. And I said, are you craving something salty, something sweet, or something meaty? And I have one kid in particular that is always wanting something that is high protein, something meaty. And so I will make a large batch of turkey meatballs. I will bake them in the oven so I don't have to fry them in the skillet. And then I will freeze them on a sheet pan. And once they're frozen, then I'll break them up and put them into a Ziploc baggie so they don't kind of clump and they're easy to pull out. And this child will just pull out 2 or 3 meatballs, heat them up in the microwave, and it makes a nice little healthy snack for them. Are there things like that you are doing for your children that you can also do for yourself? So to recap, it's important to take care of yourself, especially during this busy season. It is okay to think of foods that you need. Maybe you want to purchase some foods that are just for you. I buy a tub of cottage cheese almost every week, and no one in my family eats cottage cheese. But I find that if I have a tub of cottage cheese there, I am happy to eat it for breakfast in the mornings or as part of my lunch on top of a salad. So what foods can you purchase to take care of yourself? What foods can you make ahead and have in your refrigerator or freezer so that you are feeding yourself well as well? Here are some of my suggestions. Cook a large batch of proteins and have them in the freezer for meals when you don't have any odds and ends in your refrigerator, kind of like those meatballs that I make for my kids. Cook up a pot of soup that you like, and you can eat on it all week, or you can put it in your freezer in mason jars or those super cubes and just pull out for your lunches as you go. Make sure that if you are planning for leftovers for lunches, that you make enough portions for everybody who's going to want to eat those leftovers. And if you have a situation where you have enough of the leftovers, but like you don't have a rice or a noodle or a starch to go with it, and you're left with this meat and sauce, know that it is worth the effort to cook a little bit of rice for yourself, or use the trick. Rice freezes really well. So cook up a big batch of rice and have little 1-cup baggies of rice in your freezer ready to pull out for those times where you need a little extra starch. Or like I made the big batch of butternut squash where you have little baggies of vegetables that you can add to the odds and ends in your refrigerator to round out your meals. The bottom line is that feeding your family is such an important task, but it is also really important to take care of yourself along the way. I can't wait to hear from you, to hear how you are feeding yourself in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group. What are you doing to make sure that you are getting taken care of during this busy holiday season? For now, friends, thanks so much for joining me on the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Feed Your Family Tonight podcast with your host, Mariefiebach. If you like the show and want to know more, please visit feedyourfamilytonight.com. And if you'd like to help support the show, please leave a rating or review on iTunes or Apple Podcast. It helps spread the word that you can feed your family tonight.